This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
All right, what's up, Gorilloids? This is Steven, your host with Fantology Podcast, and I have my lifelong friends, Ryan and Josh, here on to talk about We Are Legion, the first book in the Bobiverse series. Series currently has 4 books. This is the first book, and it was published back in 2019, and I've heard a lot about it. I've had this book recommended to me probably for like 2 years, and we finally got to it via the book club on our Discord. So shout out if you want to try out some new books. Join our Discord. Invites are going to be on the episode description. But before I go too long, Ryan, Josh, what was your opinion of the book? Just kind of some high level, no spoiler stuff, and then later on we'll get into deeper discussion.
Well, the first time I heard about this book, I think it was shortly after I had read Dresden Files, and I thought that it was somehow related to Bob, the talking skull from Dresden Files. So I
Nice.
think that would be a funny little offshoot series if Jim Butcher ever decides to go in that direction, is like the Adventures of Bob. Totally
Wasn't there a short
unrelated.
story in the Dresden verse or something like that with
Yeah,
Bob?
I think there was. Um, so
I mean, there's a lot of short stories in the
yeah.
Dresden verse, and there's definitely one through Bob's perspective,
Mhm.
at least one.
Nice.
So,
Nice.
getting back to my high level thoughts on this book, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought that the setting of the book was very unique and new, at least to me. It was quite different from anything that I had read. I felt like the world building wasn't, you know, it was a medium level good. And the plot was slow at points, but overall I enjoyed it quite a bit. So I think it was a fun adventure, especially to read from a debut author. Well, actually, I don't know if this is the author's debut novel. Um, well, at least it's the first in the series. So I enjoyed it quite a bit,
Mhm.
and I want to continue.
We'll have to dig into those a little bit more. Interesting that the world building was not enough for you because large chunks of the book were like primarily just world building.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I more consider world building like building something different from what we already have. But I mean, now that you bring it up, I guess this could definitely fit into world building. But the aspects of it that you're referring to, I think we'll get into it later. I were not my favorite part of the book.
Okay.
I think similar high level opinions as Ryan. I thought it was really good. I think it's definitely worth a read for somebody that likes science fiction or likes I don't know if I'd say low stakes because it's definitely not low stakes, but nothing ever feels super high stakes, if that makes
Kind of
sense. Uh,
interesting dynamic in
yeah.
that the stakes are very high, like Fate of Humanity level stakes, but at the same time, the
It just doesn't feel
humorous
like that.
tone,
Yeah.
yeah, just kind of like tampers it all down.
Right. So it's kind of interesting in that level. But still like maybe it's just because maybe this is a weakness, but there's really nobody besides the main character that you really care about because it's the Bobiverse, you know. There
Mm,
and we'll get into all more of this on the level, but that might seem like a bad thing. For me, I'm not meaning it as a bad thing at all. I think that there are a lot of really cool things to like about it because I felt like I was just having a fun time instead of having a stressful time, if that makes sense. Like sometimes when I'm reading.
yeah.
Um, I also think that there are some things that I think are just inherent to sci-fi now that I think about them a lot with just how with maybe issues I have more with the sci-fi genre in general than with this book as a whole that kind of comes down to how quickly it moves through different conflicts as
Mm.
well as pretty much yeah just how quickly it moves through different conflicts and I think that's where I agree with Ryan about maybe he's referring to that as world building, and me, I think it's more like kind of a pacing issue. Um, but those are nitpicks. I think it's a great book. You should read it if you haven't. It's a fun reader lesson. So
Sounds like we're both of you are saying it's above average, solid book, not anything like crazy, mind-blowing, amazing. And I'm gonna agree with you. I think if I was gonna rate it, it'd be like a 7.5-ish rating for me. I think it's like you said, it's fun, it's got a humorous tone, makes you laugh at times. The weaknesses are I just feel like it's not like a super tightly dialed in narrative. It tends to kind of meander around, and there's not a real like big cohesive plot from beginning to end. I mean, I don't know if I phrased that very well. A lot happens, but it's not like your typical 3-act structure where at the end things come together in a satisfying way. It more just kind of like continues to branch out further and further, which
mhm.
makes sense when you know the plot of the book. Someone from Discord described it. I don't remember who it was, so I can't credit exactly, but someone described it as like Age of Empires in space, or like StarCraft almost, because it's very heavy like sci-fi resource management where they're like kind of building up this civilization and they've got to get the resources to build more, but then there's always this like constraint of they need more of this and more of this. And so there's a lot of discussion of, how are we going to optimize all of this? And that's, that can be fun. And it's something that really like seems to appeal to nerds, is that type of thinking, which is, who we're talking to here. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I think it does get a little exhausting as you go through the book. It gets a little bit repetitive, like, okay, now they're out of this thing, so they've got to go and spend their little bots to get more of, the blocks to etc. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess I'd say
Um,
other weaknesses are there's not a lot of characters. Josh, you touched on that. It's hard to like really get super attached to anyone other than Bob and the Bobs. But there are two really good conflicts that I was interested in and kind of carried me through the whole way. So kind of kind of all over the place with my review, but all in all, I'd say I would recommend it. But I would say, it's not incredibly polished.
yeah, I could totally see. It's weird. I can see two things. I can see both somebody loving this book and thinking it's like one of their favorite books ever, and how it's like recommending it to everyone. And I can also see somebody DNFing it, and I think that they're both like totally valid. I
Hmm.
think if you get through and you realize what the conceit, if that's the word, like what the book is really, that probably happens about a third of the way through. You probably realize that if you're like,
Yeah.
this just isn't interesting to me, then you're probably not going to be interested in it by the ending of the book, even though there are kind of two storylines that do a good job hooking you. At least they did for me. The other criticism I have, which we can talk about more in the spoiler section, is the ending. I thought yeah, it's just then it was kind of a weird ending for me. Um,
Okay.
I
Ryan,
agree.
agree, disagree? Yeah.
I agree. As far as my rating out of 10, I think I would give it a 7 out of 10. And I think it's mainly carried by the premise of the story and, the novelty of it. And it'll be interesting to see how that continues in following
Hmm.
books.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same. Like by the time you finish this book, and I don't think any of us have really read too far into the series. I did kind of start the second book, but I haven't got too far. But I am curious, how far does this premise continue to be interesting? Does it change as we get
Hmm.
into future books? Because it really kind of seems like we've done it a lot by the end of this book.
Yeah. And I
Okay.
think I think
Yeah.
that great series they have to maintain a strong focus. I mean, I guess maybe that's different because, well, I think of Malazan because it defies, my expectations of a lot of
Mm,
great series in different ways. But even thinking of the overall story arc in the first 10 Book of the Fallen, it does maintain it focuses in on a primary conflict and stays focused to the end. So I think that would be key for this series remaining good for me and
yeah.
following books is, focusing on a major narrative and continuing with that.
I mean, I think most series that we love, it's pretty easy to pick out what's the big thing going to be. Like Wheel of Time, we got to get ready for the last battle. Stormlight Archive takes a little bit to kind of get into, but you realize like, okay, this Odium character is a big problem. Malazan
Well,
is
it's the
interesting
last
because it,
desolation, right?
yeah. Well, yeah, I guess that as well. And that you get that like right from the prologue.
Yeah.
So yeah. Malazan, like you said, is interesting because it meanders quite a bit, but there is still this focus on like, okay, this crippled god character seems to be a big problem. And I've only read the first, how many have I read?
I
Six?
think
Five?
six. I think you've
Yeah.
read through Bone Hunters.
Yeah, that's right. I need to get on to Reaper's Gale soon. Good reminder. I think Jake's gonna be pushing me into that soon as well. Anyway, in this one, there is a focus, but like you said, it's kind of unclear as to like how important is this really for the Bobiverse series? Like what do we really care about? Hard to say. A couple
Yeah.
other well, yeah, Josh.
Sorry. Well, when should we get into spoilers? Because I think the answer to the question is,
Yeah.
we would need spoilers for.
Well,
So
I'll just say two more things in the non-spoiler. One, I think if you are trying to read the book and you're not super into it, try the audiobook. It's really good and the voices are funny. There's one character who the whole shtick about this character is they talk in an Admiral Akbar voice that's done very well in the audiobook and just kind of adds a little bit too. That's hard to, I mean, you could think of that voice in your head, but it's fun to hear. And there are some other voices as well, but that's kind of the main funny thing. And then I feel like there's some, important themes that get brought to light as you think more about the book that we can discuss as well.
along with that, a small thing is there are fun pop cultural references in this book.
Mm-hmm.
The book allows it to both be set far in the future and also have direct callbacks to the last 40 years or so of pop culture, and that was fun for me.
Yeah, yeah,
It
good
kind of
pull.
reminded me, that aspect reminded me of a similar vibe to Ready Player One. A
Yeah.
futuristic
Oh yeah.
setting with lots of
Uh-huh.
pop culture references in the past.
Yeah, those references are always fun because you feel smart when you know what's being talked about, and that makes you feel good and want to read more. Little writing hack. I feel like people capitalize
Yeah.
on with books like this. Okay, let's get into spoilers. So, Josh, where did you want to take us into?
Um, yeah, so I guess we can talk about the end. And I think that the end, it just is pretty abrupt for me. I didn't feel like the arcs, like the stories had really great endings. They just kind of ended
Mm-hmm.
because the book was over, if that makes sense. And it wasn't really that it ended on such like a fascinating note that like left me wanting more. It was just like, why did it end there? Was kind of the thought I had. I don't know. Did you guys have that experience too, or were you
Yeah.
more satisfied by the
I
end?
remember kind of like being like, I'm getting near the end of the book, and then being like, wait, I only have, 5 minutes left.
Yeah,
And not necessarily feeling like it was, a finished point.
yeah, kind of weird for me. What about you, Steven?
Yeah, I mostly agree. I do think the foreboding ending with the Brazilian probes out there gave us a little bit of a like, here's a hint of the future conflict, but it did just kind of seem like, okay, we've kind of made it through like most of the big things that were going on in the Deltan conflict and the Earth conflict, and most of that's been resolved. So we'll just kind of end it here, and then in the next book we'll like continue to introduce more resource constraint problems.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like that's a fair criticism. That's kind of what I was hinting at when I said like it's not really a traditional 3 act structure at all. It's really just kind of like, okay, there's 3 or 4 important bobs, and let's follow what each one of them is doing until we feel like we have enough content to like call it a book.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. It was like, okay, I'm at my word count. Things are okay, like they're at a good stopping point, I guess. Okay,
Mhm.
we'll be done, and I'll just start writing the next one.
Yeah.
It didn't really. I think it bothers me now more that I'm talking about it, and when I finish the book, I'm just like, well, yeah, I'm gonna read the next one, but this isn't making like I'm not. I didn't feel the need to like jump out of my seat and start the next one immediately. It just felt like
Uh-huh.
it felt like the conclusion to a chat. I don't know. It was just weird. It was a weird ending. I felt like it could have been little tweaks. Even other points in the book felt a lot more like they could have been better endings than the actual ending.
Um, so at the beginning of the book, I mean, I think that the pacing is a little weird, especially at the ending, like we talked about. I really like the pacing in the beginning of the book because it
Yeah,
sets
I was
things
really into the
up.
beginning. Big
It's
hook. Yeah.
it sets things up and kind of like, gets you up to speed quickly, gets Bob up to speed quickly. It's like you don't spend a lot of time in his past life and it's like, it's you're in his life for a little bit and then he dies and then wakes up and immediately is introduced to this new world. Um, so I felt like that was kind of a strong, overall point. Like you
Mhm.
said, the hook, Stephen, that really draws you into the book. And then it sort of, I think at the point where he starts creating more Bobs is where the pacing starts to get weird for me. Because then you
Right.
start going off with
Mhm.
different Bobs who weren't necessarily like introduced well enough that you're like, oh yeah, like this is this Bob, like Reich, you're like, who is Riker again? And you just kind of
Mhm.
like need to learn by like context. You're like, oh yeah, he's going back to
Mhm.
like Earth, and then you're like,
Yeah, like he's the aggressive one that's going back to Earth. Bill's the nerdy one who's sticking around and doing scientific
yeah,
research. Milo's the shy one who ran off to the corner of the galaxy. But yeah, there's kind of just like one more defined personality trait for each one of them. And
mm-hmm,
like that's kind of the point to some degree. Like they are all the same character, but it does become a little confusing as you go from chapter to chapter. And if you were to enter a chapter with no context, it would take a while to have an idea of even like, okay, which character are we following and what are they doing?
yeah. I th I think it would be like another interesting device might have been that I don't know, there was some sort of corruption in like the self-replication code or something that wasn't able to be resolved. So he was able to like copy like small aspects of his personality, but there were like still large holes that I don't know,
Mm,
somehow were made up randomly.
it's like make the characters a little more distinct.
Yeah.
Mm.
And like, make them actually different people.
Well, before we go too far in this, I just want to backtrack and say I
Yeah.
totally agree with you on the pacing through the first third or so. And I think Josh pointed to that point where the same one that we're all identifying was once we get past the launch of the von Neumann probe and he starts replicating, I was loving the book, really into it, like just kind of breezing through. And then it felt like it came to a crashing halt for a while. And I kind of bounced for a few days and couldn't really make any progress. And then once I kind of got past that point, it became interesting again. but there's definitely a weak point in the pacing through
Mhm.
there that really kind of was a detractor.
Hmm. Yeah, so I think there are the main book that I compare it against in my mind, which I don't think either of you have read. I read it with Jake, is Children of Time, which is kind of it's got this similar like macro scale view of humanity and
Mm,
like the evolution of like non-human sentient creatures. And I felt like it was just it's by Adrian Tchaikovsky if anybody wants to read it, but it was very well done in in so many of these aspects, and like it dealt with these time jumps very well and identifying, characters with minimal information. All of that was great. And so when you're reading something and you're constantly like comparing it to like a very something that does the same narrative um in
mm.
similar ways but better, it doesn't necessarily lend to the best reading experience. Um but
Were
I mean
you were you making that comparison primarily with the whole like Dalton plot, or was that really something that like throughout the whole book was
it it it,
comparable?
it became that's when it really yeah, when I really like kind of formulated the comparison. But then I
Mm,
also started to recognize like other, aspects of the book with like sci-fi and humans on colony ships, and also like this interaction between, a um more like advanced species like humans and, a less advanced sentient species that's
hmm.
like kind of coming into itself. So I don't know. I
No, that's
That's
fair. I
why I
mean,
was saying that
yeah,
the premise is what carried it. I felt like
okay.
it was, such a strong beginning, and there was a lot of momentum that, pushed me through the slower parts, which is, I think a positive thing in and of itself, because there's a lot of books that might have strong beginnings, but there isn't necessarily enough momentum to get me through the slow part.
Yeah. I think for me, the two most interesting plot lines were what was going on with Bob, original Bob 2.0, and the Deltons. I think that whole like aspect of primitive species that were helping to kind of go through initial developmental stages and survive, like that was interesting. And then Riker, aggressive Bob that went back to Seoul and had to fight off the Brazilians that were trying to line up asteroids to basically destroy the Earth, and then had to deal with all the humans bickering about who was getting on the colony ships. And those two were both really interesting. I think if I had to pick, I think the Earth plotline was my favorite because really, like, once we got to the point where I realized that humanity was still alive and there was going to be that whole thing of like we got to save the humans and take them to the new world, like that stuff's really interesting. I enjoy that. I enjoy the aspect of we're gonna colonize this new place and all of the all the imagination that connects you with. Yeah, love that. So those two things I think both were done well, and that really kind of carried it for me.
So, were there plot lines that were less interesting to you, like the battle with the Brazilians?
um I felt like that just popped up every now and then,
Yeah.
and I'm confused as to how big of a threat that actually is. And there's hints at it, especially at the end, but it would be nice to know. I mean, it almost seems like it's going to be like an end game type of conflict with this super aggressive version of Bob out there, but at the same time, the galaxy is huge, and so it's hard to say when we're gonna run into the Brazilian general guy again.
Yeah, I kind of
Yeah.
wish it was more. It was either not as big of a threat or more of an omnipresent threat, because you really only felt
Hmm.
it with that like one Bob. Was it Riker who was the one that was going after that was fighting kind of
When they were like
predominantly?
going around the Earth fighting each other, that was
Yeah,
Riker and Arthur, maybe, or
Homer?
and Homer was maybe Arthur came later. Homer was
Homer was helping
yeah
them do the,
yeah
but no, and also when they went into the other system, right? And they
at
found,
the end.
yeah, at the end.
Yeah, I don't remember which ones that was, but
Yeah, I
in
don't
that
remember.
case, like all but one were destroyed, and they sacrificed themselves to take out a bunch of the Brazilians.
Yeah.
So, Stephen, I guess I kind of hinted at it earlier, but for I kind of had the opposite opinion of the Deltans. For whatever reason, it wasn't very interesting to me. And, Archimedes,
Oh, you hated the Deltans? You don't care about Archimedes?
I wasn't very interested in that part. And
Oh my gosh, you gorilloid.
I was much more invested in the uh Riker and Homer back at
Okay.
Earth, as well as um when I mean this was a relatively small part of the book, and I forget which Bob it was who went to that planet that had been totally stripped of all metals and
Mhm.
found like those ants and basically determined that some other sentient species a long time ago had come, stripped all of the resources that they needed of this, destroyed, like with a huge gamma burst, destroyed all life on the planet and left.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I think a good sci-fi novel has to have, compelling enemy, and the like creating a novel or unknown enemy is going to make that easier,
Hmm.
which
Like
is
we need the Trisolarians out there somewhere
right. What are the Trisolarians?
from Three Body.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't, I haven't read those books, but
The
yes,
Santi, as they call themselves.
Santi.
yes, the Santi.
Oh yeah, you just watched the show, right?
I just watched the show, and
Yeah.
I don't remember
Okay.
Trisolarians being used in the show. Maybe it
The
was.
it's no, it's not. They call themselves the Santi in the show. I think both are used in the series, but Trisolarians is a bigger thing in the text. Hmm. So I think one interesting thing that they could do in the future, I have no idea if this would happen or not, was let's have an evil Bob. Uh, and I feel like this
Yeah.
kind of gets, yeah, yeah, this kind of gets into one of the themes, which I think is interesting to talk about, which is the replication of Bob, and each one kind of becomes farther away from the original. And so, what does this mean for like the status of Bob and Bill
Bob.
and right, you're right, Bob. Like, what does this mean for each replicant? And are they human? Do they have a soul? Type, all those types of questions usually get brought up in these sci-fi AI type books. But if we keep on going and replicating, it feels natural that eventually we would get like a really evil version because for whatever reason, all the negative aspects get funneled into version Hitler, right? And then they've got to take out Hitler Bob. Like that could really be fun.
Yeah. I think I really agree with what you're saying. I think that
Not that Hitler is fun, but just it would be an intriguing plot line. Let me just
I
put
don't
Hitler
know
on
if you
that.
need to,
Josh just
I
put a
don't know
bunch
if you
of
need to.
balloons across his screen when you said that, so I don't
I
know
had
if he
my
was
thing.
celebrating.
I had, just for people that are listening, we're on Zoom, and Zoom does like the cool things. If you put like a thumbs up or something, it does a little celebratory thing.
Uh,
If you wait, yeah, it does. And anyway, I had my hand on my face, and it did that right when Stephen was like, "Oh, and Bob could become Hitler," and then it decided to celebrate that idea.
and
Anyway,
Josh
uh,
canceled.
I do think uh how should I say this? So you're Stephen, you were telling us before we got on that somebody on Discord was talking about being a triplet and how triplets how it kind of felt like a similar thing to where here's somebody with the same set of genes, if you will, that are then expressed different ways in different people.
Yeah,
And that's what it felt.
that got
That's
brought up quite a bit during our Discord chat about the book in our book club meeting. Yeah.
right. And so that's what this feels like to me is I can't remember like beyond I never had anything else besides high school biology, or maybe I did have one freshman year at college, a biology
Hmm.
class. Were you in that one where we did that
Yeah.
project together? Yeah, where
I
we
was
did
in
the
your bio class. The professor came in wearing a Jedi Knight robe at one point, right?
yes.
Okay.
Did we
Yep.
work on this project together that where everybody put like it seemed like everybody put like 30 hours into it, and we had the idea to just go put down we had to do a project where we had to bring we had to do a presentation for elementary school kids. Were you in my group for this? I can't
I
remember.
don't remember. I think there was there was a pretty girl in that biology class that I feel like our groups kind of competed to get her to join into the group. So I'm not sure if you were able to get the attractive girl in your group and if I was left out or vice versa.
Dang,
But
that does
this
sound like
is
something freshman you yeah,
yeah,
freshman you might
this
have
is
Oh,
done.
my memory of the project just revolves around her involvement, but not around
Because
what was done at
I
all
think
in the
I
project.
think she was in my group.
Mm, oh God.
Anyway, anyway, so
Yeah.
what I did, maybe not Steven, for this project was just put dinosaur bones in like a little playpen and then had like a little computer where we had where it said you had a description of the bones in there to find it. It took like maybe 25 minutes to put together, and it was a big portion of our grade. And ours was by far like all the kids loved it more than any others. I think I got close to 100 on the project, and it
Heck
was
yeah.
very, very kind of last minute. And anyway, that's completely beside the point. I forgot how we got there. But
Hmm.
dang, now I completely lost track. What was I saying, Stephen?
Biology. You were talking about twins, cloning
Oh,
biology.
twins.
I
Yeah.
think
How I
yeah,
don't, yeah. How DNA is
you're about to
expressed
say
through
you don't have a
RNA
great
or
understanding of
through
yeah.
the AGT, whatever, like how that expresses your
Uh-huh.
DNA. So twins will have like the same DNA, but then that gets expressed differently, which is why twins have some differences. And me and Ben, you may not listener, you may not know if you're listening to Ben or Josh right now because we have such similar voices. And but I do feel like it got a pretty good job to where you maybe some of the differences would be like what you see in twins or brothers even, where
Mm.
yeah, they are like very much alike, and I think Ben and I would fall into the category of twins that are very much alike in a lot of ways. But there are then still little differences where we might have a little bit different sense of humor, where we might one, maybe a little bit sillier than the other. But for a large part, you could be forgiven for
different
mistaking.
different taste in their mate.
Right. Different tastes in their mate.
Different levels of Taylor Swiftiness.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and you said Ben is the clone, not you,
Yeah, Ben
right?
is definitely the clone because
Yeah.
he's not on the podcast right now. So I get to decide who the clone is.
So what are your thoughts around this idea
Yeah,
of
so all
the
this I thought
clone
was done
like
extremely
yeah,
well. Yeah. I kind
okay.
of like maybe because I'm a twin, but it was the first time I've thought about like, dang, what if I had a twin and that twin was evil? Like that would be so weird. That would be so weird. If Ben like went out and committed like murder or something or was like a serial killer and I'm his twin brother, I'd be like, what the heck? Like we had the same DNA or what like and we were super similar and then he just went and did something terrible. That seems like it would give me a lot of like a lot of what's the
Self-doubt.
You have an
self-doubt
existential
or
crisis of
existential crisis.
who
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I feel like I can relate to that level of Bob going through like an existential crisis when he sees differences in
Uh-huh.
his Bobs in his Bobiverse.
I did
Right.
really
So
like the scene when he first does like the self-replication and then wakes up and then realizes that he's the other Bob and he's like, I guess there's a chance. I knew there was a chance that I wouldn't be him. It was just well done. I'd imagine I would have similar
Mm.
feelings. Probably not as calm as that Bob was, but
And there was some discussion around we've got all these multiple Bobs. They're all clones of like Bob version 2.0, right? But who's to say
Yeah.
that the Bob that we followed for most of the book is the most like this Bob? What if Bill or Riker or whatever is
Well, you
is
would
more of
think,
the clone?
I don't know, because you would think that the differences would be magnified each version you go, right? So
Yeah,
like say that there
because
was
each
like a
one's kind
little
of
bit of
cloning themselves. Yeah, yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think it says to the question of like, are these Bob AI things, are they human? Do they have souls? How does we kind of get into this question of like um self what determination and the ability to have free will and like you pretty quickly go down that rabbit hole with most sci-fi books. Where do you think this one kind of falls in that spectrum?
I don't know. It's hard because I feel like so much of that is dictated by somebody's like own personal beliefs, their spirituality, the
Yeah,
religion.
that's fair.
Um, I mean, I think that human is like defined by a Homo sapien, right? Humans as we know it. So it's a biological definition, and he is biologically not a Homo sapien.
Mm. But he's based off of all of the like brain data from a Homo sapien.
Right. I still wouldn't define that as human.
Mm. So it's a human construct. It's a
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Okay.
So I don't know. I mean, that's
We kind of
just
we got into this discussion a bit as well during the Murderbot books because Murderbot, I don't you haven't read those, right, Ryan? But
mm-mm.
Murderbot is a robot with organic and basically a cyborg, right? And there's this question of like, is Murderbot human? And there's ways in which it acts very much like a human, and there's ways that it acts very much like a robot, and it kind of bounces around this spectrum. So okay, so your definition is it's got to have human organic material in order for us to say it's human and like has a soul and yeah.
Right. I would probably say that it has, characteristics of being human, but it is, since it's an artificial construct, maybe I mean, it is alive. In science, there's like different and they talk about it in the book. There's definitions of like what you define as alive, whereas, fire has a lot of characteristics of being alive,
Hmm.
but not all of them. So I don't know. I think he's something new, like Homo artificium. I don't know.
Homo automata, something. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fair. Josh, any thoughts along this line of
I mean, I feel like
thinking?
we talked about it. Yeah. I feel like we talked about it for the murder bot as well.
Hmm.
And I kind of talked about there. I don't know. Yeah, I don't really have a good philosophy surrounding it. I think that for applicable purposes, it should be treated like a human. If you get into like categorizing things, I don't know
Okay.
if it'll fall into the same category of human. I feel like this is like this, enter Jake. I'm channeling my inner Jake here.
Uh-huh.
Like it's tough to say categorically how it would fall.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of how we would treat it, it should be treated like something like this should be treated like a human would in terms
So
of rights granted to it.
sure.
And yeah,
Yeah, I think that's fair. I like where both of you are at. And for me, it's like easy to not really think about this too much because we're just not at that point with science where we're really
Mhm.
seriously worried about trying to figure this out. But who
Well,
knows? I mean,
some people are like this is, some people are. I think. Okay, here's my opinion on that. I think we're at the point where at least some people, especially people that are in the AI field, need to start to consider these things. And I think
okay.
actually we should start. I think we should start to take them seriously. And I'm not one of those like AI doomers, but I think that AI has come a lot further than I would have said it would be at 5 years ago.
Oh
Maybe not
yeah,
2 years
agreed.
ago, the AI hype was starting. Like maybe then I would have thought, oh, maybe in 2 years we would be further ahead. But I
Hmm.
think we are further ahead than I ever would have thought 5 years ago. And so, it kind of depends on if where we are on the curve, like of adopting it. If we're already at like the height of it or whatever, then yeah, we don't need to worry about it. But if we're at like the bottom of it where it's starting to pick up, then yeah, we do need to be worried about it because in our
Yeah.
lifetime, we definitely could have AGI. So if we haven't thought about it in terms of like a citizenry, in terms of people, in terms of governments, in terms of like the world as a whole, how we're going to treat these things, then I could for sure see it being a very big issue. And I think
Mm.
it's just, if you would allow me to continue going on the trend, I think it's really hard,
Yeah, let's
like,
hear it.
to legislate around this, to not to get political really or anything, but this isn't a thing that like one side is more, it doesn't fall neatly into like, at least in the United States, like a current right left paradigm. Like there's reasons why, maybe progressives would be supportive or scared of it, and there's reasons why conservatives would be like scared of it or supportive of it, in terms of like I don't need to go down this whole rabbit hole, but it doesn't fit neatly into a political party. So I feel like it's kind of hard for our current politicians to really address it. But I feel like looking ahead, we do need to figure it out. We do need to have some sort of guardrails where if an AGI does come online and it can pass whatever Turing test we throw at it, then what rights does it get afforded and what protections do we have from it as well?
Mm.
And so all of that I think we do need to start considering. And maybe books like this help with that. So there's my
All
spiel.
right. So politicians read Bobiverse.
Because
Okay.
I don't think we should trust politicians to come up with
But
these.
but wait, that's who needs to do it. I like
Yeah,
first of
I
all, I agree
know.
with you that we have crappy politicians right now. I think that's like everybody would agree with that. But like that's what
Uh-huh.
we need to figure out like who else is going to do it. Like tech, like tech bros. Like I don't know if they're the ones that should be determining like the rights afforded to their own creations. That seems a little weird. Like we need,
Mm.
I don't know, we need to be looking at this, but I've never heard a politician talk about it, really, So
Well, I
sorry, Ryan,
mean,
to cut you off.
can I I just think of like, defining when life begins. Not that,
Yeah,
and nobody can really agree on that.
right,
Like,
right. Yeah, we can't.
biologists,
Mm.
doctors, nobody can
Yeah,
really. So I mean, I think that just,
Same type of question here.
yeah, similar type of
yeah.
question. It's
Only
going
way,
to
kind
be
of,
very difficult.
and in a sense, that's way easier, right? To answer is because really it's from 0 days to 9 months, right? It's somewhere in there. And if I'm not saying it's easy, but you do have a boundary, right, on where life begins. Like it's somewhere between
Mm.
like conception and birth. It's somewhere
Okay.
in there. So you at least have a bound. I guess think about it from like a programming or from like a
Sure. Yeah.
analytical perspective. You have a
The
bound around
time
that.
time in the womb.
For
Yeah.
AGI, you don't have any bounds. It's just like, well, it's somewhere, like
It's
somehow, or
getting
maybe you think
more,
it
it's just
never
getting
can.
more and more intelligent. And at some point,
Yeah,
like where do you draw the line? Mm.
yeah. So that it's like an infinitely harder question to answer. And like Ryan said, we can't even legislate around something that theoretically is a lot easier. Not that, it's an easy
Mm.
question, but it's way easier than, yeah,
And
that. So,
it will be interesting to see how these books address those questions, because it's certainly hinted at, the fact that they need to be addressed. For instance, when Riker is talking to the fundamentalist church,
Yeah,
um,
the faith faction or whatever they're
yeah, the
called. Yeah.
faith faction, and he's like, "You're not a human. You're like essentially a machine that was given like the the memories of a human. And
Mhm.
so I'm sure that over the course of this series, those questions will be addressed more in depth. Maybe we should just have sci-fi authors decide.
I mean, they're the ones who've thought about the most.
Yeah.
uh, Insert Trump or Biden joke here to close out the political conversation. Yep. Cool. I think that's a pretty good review of the first book from what I've heard. So my brother-in-law, Caden, who's been on the podcast doing Wheel of Time stuff a while back, he's read all four that have come out so far. Book five is coming out later this year. And his review is that the first book is good. The second and third are not quite as good, but the fourth book kind of gets into a little bit of a new thing. He didn't really tell me what it was, but the fourth book is very good. So I'm interested. I think I'm going to plan on continuing to read through and we can do reviews. And it's fun when there's a new book coming out, so we can kind of get excited for it together.
Is there a set amount of books in the series that will be released?
I don't know. I think originally the idea was to do three, and then I think it got like, I don't know the exact history, but I think something with the publisher came online, and the option of going with longer and more in-depth books happened, and so the fourth book is like longer and kind of gets into a new type of thing. I have not done research on this, but this is just like from my the vague description that Caden gave me.
Hmm.
So take that for what it's worth, which is not much. Maybe just go check out Reddit if you're interested in the answer to that question.
Yeah, I tried to find in a quick Google search, and it did not look like there is a set answer that I could find.
Okay.
So who
Cool.
knows?
All right, Ryan, Josh, good times. Thanks for reviewing with me. Ryan, I'm disappointed that Archimedes is not your guy, but
Yeah, dude, Archimedes is the man.
I'm hoping that he, continues to thrive, and he's getting a little bit older. Now he's a ladies' man. There's a lot of interesting setup here for the Deltons. So I
I'm
hope
more
that you can,
interested.
yeah.
I'm more interested in, future romance for Bob, because he kind of hinted that he's still like attracted to, women.
Hmm.
At the beginning, he like sees one, he's like, wow, she's beautiful. And he's like, oh, that's interesting that I still believe that. So will there be an AI human romance, or will there be an AI version? Will there be versions that start to consider themselves a
Hmm.
different gender than
Like he would,
male?
yeah, he would need to come into contact with something that's not a replication of himself, as that
Yeah.
would be a
Man,
I mean,
strange
I feel like
romance.
the only other female character presented is his like great grandniece or something, right?
so, but there are other options besides the Brazilian. There was the Australian, which he found and
The
does
poor
not seem
Australian.
like it was a successful replication.
Yeah.
There's also the Chinese, right? And
Yeah,
then,
and I think there's like a European
yeah,
probe that they're not exactly
uh,
called Europeans, they're like United something something, but
the United States of
yeah,
Eurasia, I think. Although
sure.
the one that he came across was in the process of self-replication when it was destroyed by the Brazilians. So I don't know if there are more out there, but
We need a tally.
also this alien species. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but the alien species might have artificial intelligence that
You're
could be
looking for
similar.
alien romance.
Look, hey,
You're open to it.
it's an interesting premise. Yeah, well, why not?
Yeah. I mean, maybe the Deltons become advanced enough and time passes and okay, we're just
Yeah,
yeah,
some sort of
we're done.
pig AI. Okay,
I
yeah.
think we're done at this point. Okay, thanks for listening. If you want to check out more Fantology, you can join our Discord. Again, links to that will be on the episode description. We do monthly book clubs, and it's a good time. Hop on, casually chat with fellow nerds, and it's a fairly safe corner of the internet to inhabit. So I definitely recommend that if you're interested,
Yeah, we don't take
Nice.
ourselves too seriously.
or at all. All right, guys. See you later.
See ya.
Bye.